The card slapped the table like a judge's gavel. Boone Carter didn't flinch. He just watched the man across from him, this Sterling Maddox, as his face fell apart. It was the kind of look a man gets when he sees his whole life burned down in a single heartbeat. Boone had seen that look 100 times. It was the currency he traded in. He laid his hand down flat. A full house. Aces over eights. The dead man's hand, they called it. But tonight, it was the hand that gave him life. A new life. Across the table, the deed to the Painted Sky Ranch sat next to a pile of worthless chips. Sterling Maddox pushed it forward with a hand that trembled just enough to be convincing. Boone picked it up. The paper was still warm. It felt like holding a future. But something was wrong. Dead wrong. Sterling Maddox looked up, and his eyes weren't broken. They weren't filled with despair. They were glittering. He smiled, a thin, tight smile that didn't reach those strange eyes. It was the smile of a man who just set a perfect trap and was waiting for the steel to snap shut. Boone had won a ranch, but a cold knot in his gut told him he had actually lost something far more important. He just didn't know what it was yet. He tucked the deed into his vest, the legal ink a brand against his chest. He nodded once to the silent men watching from the shadows of the saloon, their faces lit by the hazy glow of lanterns. He turned his back on Sterling Maddox and the ghost of his smile and walked out into the dusty night. The ride was long. 3 days of dust and sun, with nothing but the rhythm of his horse and the weight of that deed for company. He kept replaying that final hand, that final look. A man doesn't lose a legacy, a lifetime of work, and smile like that, unless the prize wasn't the ranch at all, unless the real prize was the man who won it. When he finally crested the last ridge, he saw it, the painted sky. It was more than the deed described. Rolling hills the color of honey flowed into a valley cradled by ancient cottonwoods. The ranch house itself was solid, built of stone and timber, with a porch that looked out over the entire world. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin gray ribbon against the deep blue sky. Someone was home. Of course, someone was home. Maddox had probably left his family behind, expecting Boone to be the one to deliver the bad news. The thought soured in his mouth. He dismounted, his boots thudding on the dry earth. The place was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, or right before one hits. The front door was open just a crack. He heard a sound from inside, a woman humming. The tune was soft and sad, a melody that felt like a memory he couldn't quite place. He climbed the porch steps, the wood groaning under his weight, and knocked. The humming stopped. Silence. Then slow footsteps. The door swung open, and he found himself staring at a girl who couldn't have been more than 20. She had dark hair tied back and eyes the color of a stormy sky. There was a fierceness in those eyes that made him take an involuntary step back. She held a shotgun in her hands, the barrel resting easy, but pointed right at his heart. "You're lost, mister," she said. Her voice was low and steady, with an edge like sharpened steel. It wasn't a question. "Name's Boone Carter." He reached into his vest, moving slow. He saw her knuckles turn white on the shotgun. "I'm the new owner." He held out the deed. He expected tears, maybe anger. He expected her to plead, to bargain. He didn't expect her to laugh. It was a cold, bitter sound. "There's been a mistake," she said, her eyes never leaving his. This ranch was never for sale, and Sterling Maddox had no right to bet what wasn't his to lose. Boone looked down at the paper in his hand. The signatures were there. The county seal was pressed into the parchment. It was as legal as the sunrise. "Ma'am, according to this, I own every rock, every tree, from that creek to the eastern ridge, including this house." She stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind her. The click of the latch was loud in the still air. The shotgun never wavered. "Then you'll have to take it from me," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more dangerous than a shout. "Because I'm not leaving. My name is Cora Lane, and this land is mine. I have proof that makes that piece of paper in your hand worthless than ash." The standoff was absolute. The sun beat down, and the only sound was the buzz of flies and the pounding of Boone's own heart. He was a poker player. He knew a bluff when he saw one. He'd built his life on reading the tells in a man's eyes, the twitch of a muscle, the sweat on his brow. But this woman, Cora Lane, she had no tells. Her gaze was as steady as a mountain. The shotgun in her hands didn't tremble. She was holding more than a pair of aces. She was holding the truth. "What kind of proof?" he asked, his voice tight. "The kind that proves Sterling Maddox is a thief, a liar, and a whole lot worse," she shot back. "But I'm not about to show it to the man who's holding his stolen paper. For all I know, you're in on it with him." The accusation stung. Boone Carter played hard, but he played fair. His name was his bond. "I won this property in a poker game. Fair and square. In Millerville 3 nights ago. Maddox bet it all on a losing hand. The town sheriff watched the whole thing. He saw a crack in her armor then, a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It was confusion. Pure, unfiltered shock. "Maddox was in Millerville 3 nights ago?" she asked, her voice losing its edge for the first time. "You sound surprised," Boone pushed. "When was the last time you saw him?" She turned away, walking to the porch rail and gripping it so hard her fingers turned white. Her shoulders slumped. The shotgun finally lowered. "6 months ago," she said, her voice so quiet he had to strain to hear it. "He rode out of this valley and said he was never coming back. He said the memories were too much to bear." She looked back at him, and the fierceness was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow pain. "I thought he was gone for good." The air thickened with unspoken history. This wasn't about a deed anymore. It was about scars, about memories that were apparently so powerful they could drive a man from his own land. "What memories?" Boone asked, stepping closer. Before she could answer, a new sound filled the valley. Hoof beats. At least 3 riders, coming fast. They crested the ridge, kicking up a plume of dust that caught the afternoon sun like a storm cloud. Cora's face went white as a sheet. She recognized the man in the lead, the silver star on his vest winking in the light. "Sheriff Wallace," she breathed, and all the fight seemed to drain out of her at once. "Maddox must have sent him. He must have told him you were coming." She turned to Boone, her eyes wide with a sudden, desperate panic. "You have to believe me. Whatever story Maddox told you, whatever Wallace is about to tell you, it's a lie." The riders pulled up in the yard, their horses breathing hard. Sheriff Wallace was a big man, with a face like a worn leather saddle and eyes that missed nothing. The 2 men with him were deputies, but they had the hard, vacant look of hired guns. Wallace's hand rested on the butt of his pistol, a casual gesture that was anything but. "Boone Carter, I presume," Wallace said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He didn't look at Cora. It was like she wasn't even there. "Sterling Maddox sent a wire. Said you might find a squatter here. Warned me there might be some difficulty." Boone felt Cora stiffen beside him. This was a performance, a well-rehearsed one. "No difficulty, Sheriff," Boone said, holding up the deed. "I have the legal title." Wallace took the document, gave it a brief, almost dismissive glance, and handed it back. "Seems to be in order." He finally turned his cold eyes on Cora. "Miss Lane, you've been given more than enough notice. The law says you have to vacate the property. Now pack your things." "This is my home," Cora cried, her voice trembling with a rage that seemed to shake her whole body. "My family built this ranch. Sterling Maddox stole it from us with lies and forged papers." "That's a very serious accusation," Wallace said, his tone bored, as if he'd heard it all 1,000 times. "You've been making those claims for months. The judge asked for proof. You never provided any." He took a step onto the porch, his presence suddenly suffocating. "Now, I'm not going to ask you again." Cora stood her ground, but Boone could see the tremor in her hands. She was trapped. Whatever proof she had, she couldn't show it. Or maybe she didn't have any at all. Maybe she was just a desperate girl telling a wild story. The thought made his stomach churn. That smile on Maddox's face, it had to mean something. "Wait," Boone heard himself say. The word was out before he'd even decided to speak it. Both Wallace and Cora looked at him, stunned. "It's my property now. If I say she can stay, then she stays." Wallace's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. That would be a mistake, son. A big one. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping low. That girl is poison. The last man who owned this place, Samuel Hendricks, tried to be charitable. A week later, his prize bull was dead, and his barn was burned to the ground. She claimed it was an accident, but we all know. That's a lie, Cora spat, lunging forward before Boone caught her arm. Hendricks was a drunk who knocked over his own lantern. You know that, Wallace. You just needed someone to blame. The point is, Wallace said, his voice like grinding stone, trouble follows that one like a shadow. You'd be wise to start clean. He put his hand on his gun again. This time, it wasn't casual. She leaves today, one way or another. The threat was naked, a clear line drawn in the dust. Boone looked from the sheriff's hard face to Cora's desperate one. He was standing in the middle of a story he didn't understand, a feud that had deep, tangled roots. But he understood one thing. He was being pushed, and Boone Carter didn't like being pushed. He had won the pot. He would play the hand his way. He stepped squarely between Cora and the sheriff. She stays, he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a razor. This is my land now. I decide who comes and goes, and you and your men can get off it. For a long moment, nobody moved. The two deputies shifted in their saddles, their hands drifting toward their pistols. Wallace's face went dark with a fury he didn't bother to hide. Boone braced himself. He knew this could go sideways, fast. Have it your way, Carter, Wallace snarled, finally backing down. He swung himself back onto his horse with a violent jerk. But you're a fool. You just bought yourself a whole world of trouble. He wheeled his horse around, but paused, looking back at Boone with a venomous glint in his eye. And when it comes for you, don't come crying to the law. We won't be coming to help. He spurred his horse and rode away, his men trailing behind him like vultures. The dust they kicked up settled slowly, leaving a silence that felt heavier and more dangerous than the shouting had. Cora was staring at him, her face a mask of disbelief and fear. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. You have no idea what you've just stepped into. Then explain it to me, Boone said, turning to face her fully. Start with what Wallace was talking about. Start with why he's so determined to see you gone. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the distant hills where the sheriff had disappeared. Her hands were trembling. My father was Thomas Lane, she began, her voice barely a whisper. He built this place from nothing. Every fence post, every stone in that house. He put it there with his own hands. He poured his life into this valley. Her breath hitched. But he had a weakness. He trusted the wrong people. He trusted Sterling Maddox. The name came out like a curse. Maddox was his friend, or so he thought. He convinced my father to invest everything we had in a new cattle venture, a partnership. But the cattle never existed. The money just vanished. When my father found out he'd been swindled, that we were ruined, he was destroyed. Boone waited, the cold knot in his stomach tightening. He could feel where this story was going. He confronted Maddox, right in the middle of town, at the banker's office. There was an argument, shouting. Cora's voice broke. They said my father attacked him, that Maddox fell and hit his head on the corner of a desk. She finally looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. They called it manslaughter. They said it was an accident, but that my father was responsible. They locked him up, and while he was in jail, waiting for a trial he would never get, Sterling Maddox, the man he supposedly killed, produced a document, a promissory note, saying my father had signed the ranch over to him to cover a gambling debt. A lie, Boone finished for her. A complete lie, she confirmed, her voice hardening again. My father would never gamble with this land. Never. But the note looked real. And with my father in jail and Maddox supposedly dead, the court awarded the ranch to his estate. Boone felt a chill crawl up his spine, a cold realization dawning. Wait, you said supposedly dead. You said they called it manslaughter. Cora took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto his, and she delivered the first real twist of the knife. Sterling Maddox didn't die that day, Mr. Carter. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Every certainty Boone had held just moments before crumbled into dust. The deed in his pocket felt like a hot coal. But Everyone thinks he's dead, Boone stammered, his mind racing. The sheriff, the whole town, the whole town was told a story, Cora said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A story cooked up by Maddox himself to fake his own death, steal this ranch, and frame my father all in one clean motion. He disappeared for a while, letting the story take root, letting everyone believe the lie. Boone's head was spinning. The poker game, the strange smile, the desperation to lose. It wasn't desperation, it was a performance. If Sterling Maddox is alive, Boone said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth, then who did I play poker with 3 nights ago? Cora looked at him, and her expression was a mixture of pity and grim satisfaction. You played poker with a ghost, Mr. Carter, or the next best thing. She leaned in, as if afraid the whispering wind might carry her words to the wrong ears. He has a brother, an identical twin named Cyrus. Nobody around here even knew he existed until 6 months ago, when he rode into town claiming to be Sterling, miraculously recovered from his fatal injury. The trap wasn't just set. Boone had walked right into it, whistling a happy tune. Cyrus, pretending to be his dead brother Sterling, had used the ranch as a poker stake in a public game, witnessed by the sheriff himself. He'd intentionally lost it to a stranger, an outsider, to Boone. Why? To create a legal, ironclad transfer of ownership to an unsuspecting third party. It was a way of laundering the stolen property, washing it clean of the Lane family's claim. Boone wasn't the winner, he was the patsy, the fall guy. Why would he do all this? Boone asked, his voice rough. Why pretend to be Sterling? Debts, Cora answered simply. The real Sterling Maddox was a swindler and a cheat. He owed dangerous men a lot of money, men from out of the territory. By faking his death, he could escape them. Cyrus took his place. His plan was probably to liquidate all of Sterling's assets, like this ranch, and then disappear himself, leaving all the creditors and me with nothing. So this deed, Boone pulled the document from his vest. It looked different now, tainted. It's a fraud. Yes, Cora said. And no. Boone stared at her. That doesn't make any sense. The man you played against, Cyrus, was an imposter. So the signature on the transfer is fraudulent, she explained, her mind clearly having worked this puzzle from every angle for months. But here's the problem. Before the real Sterling faked his death, he created a will that left everything he owned, including this ranch he stole from us, to his loving brother Cyrus. The trap was more brilliant and more diabolical than Boone could have imagined. Cyrus legally inherited the stolen ranch. Then by impersonating Sterling, he sold it to Boone. It was a tangled web of identities and legal documents designed to be impossible to unravel. Then how do you prove any of this? Boone asked, feeling a wave of hopelessness. It's your word against a legal will and a notarized deed. Because the will was forged, Cora said, a spark of defiance returning to her eyes. I know it was. My father told me. The real Sterling Maddox would never have left anything to Cyrus. They hated each other. She walked to an old, heavy oak chest sitting by the door. And the proof is in here. She knelt and began to work the lock, her fingers fumbling with a small key. My father was a meticulous man. He knew Maddox was a snake. He kept records of everything. Letters, birth certificates, documents that proved Sterling Maddox was my mother's half-brother, my uncle. The lock clicked open. Cora lifted the heavy lid. The box was empty. Every scrap of paper, every letter, every bit of her so-called proof was gone. Cora stared into the empty box, her face crumbling in despair. All the fight, all the fire just vanished, replaced by a hollow, broken emptiness. It's gone, she whispered, her voice cracking. It's all gone. Wallace, he must have taken it when he searched the house after they took my father. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Sheriff Wallace wasn't just a crooked lawman enforcing a bad deed. He was part of it. He was Cyrus's partner. He had helped orchestrate the entire thing, clearing the path by removing Cora's father and confiscating the only evidence that could expose them. Boone looked from Cora's devastated face to the empty box, and for the first time he felt a hot, surging anger. He had been played for a fool, used as a pawn in a game far bigger than a poker hand. This wasn't about winning a ranch anymore. It was about justice. He wouldn't have destroyed it, Boone said, thinking out loud, the mind of a gambler looking for the hidden card. A forger, a cheat, they don't destroy evidence. They hide it. They keep it, just in case they need leverage later. Cora looked up, a tiny flicker of hope in her eyes. What do you mean? Wallace and Cyrus are partners, but they don't trust each other. Wallace would have kept that proof as insurance, a guarantee that Cyrus couldn't double-cross him. Boone began pacing the porch, his mind racing. He wouldn't keep it in his office. Too obvious. He wouldn't keep it at his home. Too risky. He'd hide it somewhere nobody would ever think to look. Somewhere safe. Somewhere he could keep an eye on it. He stopped, his eyes scanning the vast expanse of the valley spread out before them. The ranch, the house, the outbuildings. He hid it here, Boone said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. On the ranch. That's why he was so desperate to get you off this land. Not because you're a troublemaker, but because he was afraid you might find it. The game had changed again. This wasn't just a quest to clear Cora's name. It was a treasure hunt. They were standing on top of the one thing that could bring the whole conspiracy crashing down. And they had no idea where to even start looking. The sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of the valley felt like a mockery. They were prisoners on their own land, surrounded by enemies they couldn't see, searching for a secret that was buried right under their feet. Where do you hide something in plain sight? Boone's gambler's mind went to work, sifting through possibilities, looking for the tell. It wouldn't be buried. Too much work, too much evidence of digging. It had to be somewhere within the existing structures. The house, the barn, the smokehouse. My father, Cora said suddenly, her voice sharp. He built this house. He was a stonemason by trade. He used to say that every stone tells a story. She ran to the massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room. He built this with his own hands. He always said it was the heart of the home. They ran their hands over the cool, rough-hewn stones, tapping, listening, searching for any hollow sound, any sign of a hidden compartment. Nothing. They checked the walls, the floorboards, the cellar. The house was solid, unyielding. As darkness fell, a sense of dread began to creep in. Wallace could come back at any time, and this time he wouldn't be asking nicely. The barn, Boone said, grabbing a lantern. Let's check the barn. The barn was huge, filled with the sweet smell of old hay and leather. The lantern cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to twist and writhe in the darkness. They searched for hours. They climbed the hayloft, checked every stall, inspected every beam and post. They found nothing but dust and memories. Defeated, they trudged back to the house. The moon was high now, casting a pale, ghostly light over the valley. Cora slumped onto the porch steps, the picture of despair. It's no use, she said, her voice thick with exhaustion. He's won. Wallace has won. Boone stood over her, his mind refusing to quit. He stared out at the dark landscape, his eyes tracing the familiar shapes of the hills against the starry sky. He thought back to the poker game, to Cyrus, to the deed itself. He pulled it from his pocket one more time, though he knew it was worthless. He unfolded it under the moonlight, his eyes scanning the legal jargon, the signatures, the seal, and then he saw it. It wasn't in the words. It was in the paper itself, a watermark. Most official documents had one, usually the county emblem or the name of the solicitor. But this one was different. Held up to the moonlight, a faint, intricate pattern emerged from within the fibers of the paper. It was a series of lines and symbols. It was a map. Cora, he said, his voice trembling with a sudden surge of adrenaline. Look at this. She came to his side, and together they stared at the ghostly image embedded in the deed. It was unmistakable. It showed the layout of the ranch yard, the house, the barn, the creek. And there was a single prominent X marked on the map. It was right over the old dry well in the center of the yard. The well had been abandoned for years, covered with heavy oak planks. It took both of them, straining with a crowbar to pry the first plank loose. The wood was old and rotten, and it splintered with a sound like a breaking bone. A wave of cool, musty air rose from the darkness below. Boone lit a new lantern and lowered it down. The stone-lined shaft plunged into blackness. About 20 feet down, the light caught on something. A narrow ledge just wide enough for a man to stand on. And on that ledge sat a small metal lockbox. That has to be it, Cora breathed, her eyes wide. The old rope and pulley were still intact, but the rope was frayed and thin. It was a risk, a big one. "I'll go," Boone said, not a hint of hesitation in his voice. This was it, the final hand, all in. He tied the rope securely around his waist, tested it once, twice, and then began his slow descent into the earth. The air grew colder, smelling of damp stone and decay. The walls of the well were slick with moisture. Above him, Cora's face was a pale circle of worry in the moonlight. He reached the ledge, his boots finding purchase on the slimy stone. The lockbox was heavy, its metal cold and rusted. He looped the handle through his belt and gave the signal to be pulled up. The ascent was agonizingly slow. The old rope groaned and creaked with every pull, sending showers of dirt and pebbles raining down on him. He was halfway up when he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold, a low, menacing laugh from the darkness above. He looked up. Cora was gone. In her place, a new silhouette stood over the mouth of the well, blocking out the moon. It was Sheriff Wallace, and in his hand he held a gleaming knife. "I knew you were clever, Carter." Wallace's voice echoed down the stone shaft. "Just not clever enough." He sliced through the rope. The world dropped out from under Boone. He plunged into the blackness, a single desperate cry torn from his lungs. He hit the bottom of the well with a bone-jarring impact that knocked the wind out of him. The lantern shattered, plunging him into absolute suffocating darkness. He lay there stunned, his body screaming in protest. Pain flared in his ankle, broken, or at least badly sprained. He tried to push himself up, his hands sinking into something soft and muddy at the bottom of the well. The lockbox was still on his belt, its hard edge digging into his side. He had the proof, but he was at the bottom of a 40-foot hole with a broken ankle, and a killer was standing at the top. He heard Wallace's voice again, closer this time. He must have been leaning over the edge. "Don't you worry about Miss Lane. Me and her are going to have a little chat, once she tells me where she hid the other half." The other half? What was he talking about? Then he heard another voice, a man's voice filled with a sneering arrogance. "Did he have the box, Wallace?" "He's got it," the sheriff called back. "Right where you said it would be. Looks like your little map worked perfectly." Boone's heart hammered against his ribs. It wasn't Wallace's hiding spot. The map on the deed, it was another trap. A trap laid by the man Boone had played poker with. Cyrus Maddox. He was here. "Well, don't just stand there." Cyrus's voice drifted down. "Get the box and let's get out of here. My other business partners will be here soon, and they're not nearly as patient as I am." "What about him?" Wallace asked. "Leave him," Cyrus said with chilling indifference. "By the time anyone finds him, we'll be halfway to Mexico, and this whole valley will belong to our associates." Boone heard the sound of a new rope being lowered. A grappling hook scraped against the stone. They were coming down for the box. He was trapped, injured, and unarmed. He frantically felt around in the dark, his fingers closing on a loose, heavy rock. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The grappling hook snagged the handle of the lockbox on his belt. The rope pulled taut, jerking him painfully. He gripped the rock, his knuckles white. The box was being pulled up, dragging him with it. He held on, letting them do the work, his mind racing, searching for an angle, a chance. He was 10 feet from the top when he acted. With a roar of effort, he swung the rock with all his might, smashing it against the stone wall of the well. The impact sent a shower of sparks into the darkness, and more importantly, it sent him swinging like a pendulum. He crashed into the side of the well, the lockbox breaking free from the hook and clattering back down into the darkness below. "What the hell?" Cyrus yelled from above. Boone didn't wait. He found a handhold on the rough stones, his fingers screaming in protest. He ignored the fire in his ankle and began to climb. He was a cornered animal, fueled by pure, desperate adrenaline. He was almost to the top when a face appeared over the edge. Not Wallace, Cyrus. His face was a mask of fury in the moonlight. He held a pistol, the barrel a perfect black circle of death, pointed right at Boone's face. "You are becoming a real problem," Cyrus snarled. A gunshot exploded in the night. But it wasn't Cyrus's gun. The shot came from somewhere behind him. Cyrus's eyes went wide with shock. A dark stain blossomed on the front of his shirt. He looked down at his chest in disbelief. Then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he tumbled forward, falling into the well and crashing into the darkness beside Boone. Boone scrambled the last few feet out of the well, collapsing onto the ground, gasping for air. He looked up and saw Cora. She was standing 20 feet away, the shotgun she'd first greeted him with smoking in her hands. Behind her, tied to a porch post, was Sheriff Wallace, gagged and struggling against his bonds. "I told you," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "This is my fight, too." Before Boone could respond, a new sound cut through the night. The thunder of hoofbeats, dozens of them. A large group of riders was descending on the ranch, moving with a disciplined, military precision. They weren't lawmen, and they weren't cowboys. They surrounded the ranch house in a silent, deadly cordon. A man dismounted, a tall figure, with a long coat and a face half hidden by a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He moved with the deadly grace of a panther, his eyes scanning the scene. The open well, the dead body of Cyrus, the captured sheriff. "Well, well," the scarred man said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. He had a strange accent Boone couldn't place. "It seems you've saved us some trouble." He gestured to the dead man. "Cyrus owed my employer a great deal of money. He promised us this ranch to settle the debt, and the gold hidden on it." Gold. That was the missing piece. The reason this ranch was so important. It wasn't just about the land. "We are here to collect," the man said, his hand resting on a pearl-handled revolver. His men began to dismount, fanning out, their weapons drawn. They were outnumbered, hopelessly outnumbered. The scarred man walked over to the well and peered down into the darkness. "The gold was supposed to be in a lockbox. I assume it's still down there." "You assume wrong," Boone grunted, pushing himself to a sitting position, the pain in his ankle a white-hot agony. The man turned, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "Is that so?" "That box," Boone said, playing the only card he had left, a bluff. "It doesn't have gold. It has a ledger, Sterling Maddox's ledger. It details every crime, every partner, every dirty dollar. It names names. It names your boss." The man's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." "Am I?" Boone countered, his voice gaining strength. "That's why Cyrus and Wallace wanted it so badly. It was their insurance policy, and now it's mine." It was a complete shot in the dark, a wild guess based on Wallace's cryptic comment about the other half. But he saw a flicker of doubt in the scarred man's eyes. It was working. "Give me the box," the man commanded, his voice tight. "First you let her go," Boone said, nodding toward Cora. "She rides out of this valley, and you never see her again. Then I tell you where the ledger is." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I don't make deals with dead men." He raised his revolver, aiming it squarely at Boone's head. "Last chance." Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tense standoff. "Vincent Kane, drop your weapon. You are under the authority of the United States Marshals." Everyone froze. A second group of riders had appeared on the ridge, materializing out of the darkness as if from nowhere. They were lawmen, federal lawmen, their badges gleaming in the moonlight. They had Kane and his men surrounded. The scarred man, Kane, went pale. His bluff had been called by a higher authority. For a moment it looked like he might try to shoot his way out. His men tensed, their fingers on their triggers. The ranch yard was a powder keg, ready to explode. "It's over, Kane," the lead marshal said, dismounting. "We've been tracking Cyrus's operation for months. We know about the train robbery, we know about the gold, and we know he was working with you." Kane, realizing he was trapped, made a desperate, fatal choice. He spun, not toward the marshals, but toward Cora, intending to take a hostage. He never made it. Boone, ignoring the searing pain in his ankle, launched himself forward, tackling Kane at the knees. They went down in a heap, Kane's gun flying from his hand. The ranch yard erupted in a cacophony of gunfire. When the smoke cleared, it was over. Kane's men were either dead or surrendering. Kane himself was being hauled to his feet by two marshals, his face a mask of defeated fury. The lead marshal, a stern-faced man named Davidson, walked over to Boone and Cora. "You two have had quite a night." He looked at the bound Sheriff Wallace with disgust. "We'll be taking him with us, too. We had a suspicion he was involved." He then looked down into the well. "My men will retrieve the lockbox. We need that gold as evidence." "Be careful with it," Boone said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "There's a ledger in there, too." An hour later, the prisoners were secured, and the valley was quiet again. Marshal Davidson sat on the porch with Boone and Cora. The lockbox sat between them, open. Inside, nestled among stacks of stolen gold bars, was a slim, leather-bound book, Sterling Maddox's ledger. Boone's wild bluff had been the absolute truth. The ledger told the whole story. It detailed the swindle of Cora's father, the faked death, Cyrus's impersonation. It implicated Sheriff Wallace as a key partner who helped forge documents and intimidate witnesses. But it contained one final shocking revelation, a secret that changed everything. According to the last entry, written in Sterling's own hand the day he was supposedly killed, the fight with Thomas Lane at the bank had been a setup, but not just to frame him. Sterling was planning to double-cross Cyrus and Kane and disappear with all the gold himself. He had provoked the fight with Cora's father, intending to fake a minor injury, but Cyrus had seen his chance. In the confusion, he hadn't just let his brother fall. He had pushed him, and he had made sure his head hit the sharpest corner of the desk with maximum force. It wasn't Thomas Lane who had killed Sterling Maddox. It was his own twin brother. Cora's father was an innocent man, framed for a crime that never happened, by a man who was already dead. "This ledger will exonerate your father completely," Davidson said, closing the book. "He'll be a free man by the end of the week." He turned to Cora. "And with the original fraud exposed and Cyrus's will invalidated, this ranch and everything on it belongs to you. The title is clear." Cora looked out over the valley, her valley, tears of relief finally streaming down her face. Davidson then turned to Boone. "As for you, Mr. Carter, that deed in your pocket is worthless. You were a victim of fraud, same as everyone else. You're free to go." Free to go. The words echoed in Boone's ears. He had nothing. His poker winnings were gone. His horse was tired, and he had a broken ankle. He was right back where he started, a man with no future, just a past. He watched the marshals ride away, taking the criminals and the gold with them, leaving peace and quiet in their wake. He slowly, painfully, began to pull himself to his feet, ready to limp his way to his horse and ride off to whatever dusty town came next. "Where are you going?" He turned. Cora was standing there, her eyes clear and steady. The storm finally passed. "Don't have much choice," he said with a wry, tired smile. "The game's over." "No," she said, stepping closer. "It's just beginning." She looked around at the ranch, at the house her father built, at the land that was finally truly hers. "This is a big place. Too big for one person to rebuild. Too much work. I need a partner." She looked directly into his eyes, and he saw not pity, not charity, but an offer. A real one. A chance to stop winning pots and start building something. A chance to have a stake in something real. For the first time in a long, long time, Boone Carter felt like he was holding a winning hand, and it had nothing to do with cards. "I think," he said, the smile reaching his eyes for the first time in years, "I'd like that very much." If you enjoyed this story of twists, turns, and frontier justice, you won't want to miss the video on your screen right now. It's another tale of deception and redemption that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And hey, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Every subscription helps us bring more of these stories to light. Thanks for watching.